By the end of this video, you will learn how to use component properties such as Boolean property, text property, instance swap property, and expose properties from nested instances. We will learn how to create a master component and nest other components within that master component to have nested component structure. You can easily switch between icons using instance swap, change the value of your text using text properties, and hide and show them using Boolean property. Moreover, we are going to implement auto layout and master how to nest auto layouts inside one another in just 20 minutes. First, we gotta create a text, Shift and A to create an auto layout, rename this to button as well by double clicking, naming this to button. Once we're happy, we can click outside. Now it's time for us to create a component. There are multiple ways for you to create a component. You can click on your button, go ahead and click on that diamond shape icon to create a component, or you can hold Command / to bring up the quick action and search create component. Once you create your component, your button is now purple. If we take a look at the left hand side, you see that the shape of the layer has changed from auto layout to the diamond shape. That indicates that this is a master component. Also, if we take a look at the right side, we see now we have the option to add properties. If we go ahead and duplicate this by holding Option and dragging it out, as you can see now we are selecting an instance. If we take a look at the left hand side, you can see the icon is now different. If we hover over the component, you see the tooltip tells us that this is a master component, and if we go one up, we know that this is the instance which has a different icon. Also, when you take a look at this instance, you see you don't have the ability to add any properties. You can only add component properties if you select the master component. So by selecting the master component, I have now the ability to add properties. So the first property that I usually add is a text property. Once I select my master component, I navigate to add properties and click on the plus. By doing that, I now have the option to create 4 different properties. So I would go ahead and click text, and I can rename this to label. You can also give it a default value of button. We officially created our first component property. What you notice is on the right hand side, we have this error icon, which tells us that we haven't used this component property in our master component. So how can we use this component property and link it to our text button? All we need to do is navigate to the master component layer, open it, select the text layer, navigate to the typography section, and as you can see, we see this tiny icon which is apply text property. If we go ahead and click on that, a pop-up appears. Now we can link our component property to our text button by selecting the label. You can control the name of this component property by always clicking on the master component and navigating all the way to the component properties. You can go ahead and select on the settings and rename this to whatever value you want. In this case, I left it as label, all lowercase. This way, when I click on my text button and I navigate to my typography section, I now see the label. Let's just go ahead and click on our master component. Just give it a dark background color by clicking on the plus and clicking on the fill and going and selecting 20%. Now if I go ahead and select my instance, you can see I officially created my first component property, which is called label. Now I have the ability to select the label and change it to sign up. And as you can see, as soon as I change the label, my instance get updated as well. If I go ahead and select my master component and I visit my component property panel and I go ahead and hover over my component property text and delete that property, if I now navigate to my instance, you see I don't have the ability to update my text using my component property panel. So I'm going to hold Command and Z to revert the changes multiple times so we're back at our original state. What you also notice is as soon as you remove that component property, the text as well gets removed, which means if I have another button, if I duplicate that and have login and I click outside, and if I go to my master one and remove the component property label, you see both of my buttons lose their value. So I'm going to Command Z that to revert the changes to show that this is how we are controlling our text property. Our second component property is called variant. So if I go ahead and visit my button and I click on that component property icon to create another property, instead of text this time, I would go ahead and select variant. If I go ahead and select the variant, now you see that my properties panel is being updated. The icon of the variant is different than the icon of the text, as you can see on the top right side, and Figma by default gives it a property placeholder text and also gives it a default placeholder text as well. We use the component property variant to create different versions of our component. In this example, let's just go ahead and rename this to style. And if I go ahead and navigate to my master component, now we see that we have our first one, which is called default. So if I select my component, you see the icon is now changed. This is the difference between a variant icon, an instance icon, and a master component icon. They all have different icons. So I need to click on my variant icon, and as soon as I click on that, you see my component property panel has changed. So now I have the ability to update the value from default to a gray button by just simply typing gray. If I decide to add another variant, there are 2 ways for me to add a variant. I can click on my master component and navigate to that 3 tiny dots, which is more action on the top. Click on that and have the add variant option selected. Or you can select your master component and you see that plus button appear. By hovering over that plus button, you can now add another variant to your button. If I go ahead and select that plus, you see Figma added another button for me. If I take a look at the left hand side, we see that another variant is added for us and Figma gave it a value of style 2. So there's 2 ways for me to update the value of this component property, is either by renaming the layer here by double clicking on it and going ahead and renaming this after the equal sign, or simply I can select the variant and rename this from the right hand side. Since we have a style gray, we want to create a different style. So we just go ahead and select that and give it a value of white. Also, we need to scroll down for our second variant, update the fill to 100% white, and go ahead and select the text and update that to 20%. So if I select my master component button, we now manage to create 2 component properties, one which is a text property, the other one which is a variant property. And then as you can see on the left hand side, we have this master component, which is a button, and this is the icon, and we have the 2 variants with these filled diamond shape icon, and we have our instances, which is an empty diamond shape icon. So now if I go ahead and click on one of my instances, which is sign up, I now have the ability to switch between gray and white. And as you can see, the text is preserved as I switch between different button styles. The reason the text is preserved because we are creating a text property. For example, if I go ahead and select my second button, which is a style of white, and if I go ahead and select the text and scroll down on the typography section, you see that we are linking it to the label text property. If I go ahead and click on that and detach that property, and if I go ahead and click on my sign up, and if I scroll up, as soon as I switch to white, you see that the text is not preserved. So you can only preserve the text if you link it using a text component property. So I'm going to click outside, Command Z that multiple times to revert the changes, and I have to make sure I select my text by navigating to the layer panel, selecting the text property, scrolling down, and making sure on the typography section I select that tiny icon to apply the text property, and I go ahead and select label. As soon as I select label, you see that the label is being highlighted for me. If I also select my gray text button on the left hand side, you see that both of them are now linked to label, which means if I click on my login and if I scroll up, I now can safely switch it to white and gray, and the text property and the value of my button is preserved. Let's just go ahead and create another text layer by clicking on the text and clicking here and then just renaming this to header. Let's just go ahead and scroll down, select the font weight, making it semi-bold, select the font size, making it 32 pixels, and select the fill and making it 20%. Right now we have our first text layer selected. If I hold Option and duplicate this, I would simply now change this from 32 pixels to 20 pixels, from semi-bold to regular, and from 20% I would go to 50%. Also, I would double click and rename this to paragraph. So now I can select both of my header and paragraph, Shift and A to create an auto layout, and renaming this to card by double clicking on the layer, renaming this to card, scrolling down to the fill section, adding a fill, which is a white background, going to the auto layout, adjusting the gap between them to 8 pixels, and holding Command and selecting the padding and giving it 24 pixels on the left and right side. Also, I would just go ahead, click the card, drag it out. So I went ahead and imported some icons from a plugin. In order for you to import any icons to your Figma project, all you have to do is to click on the resources, go to the plugins, and search for icons. As you can see, you get a list of icons to select from. For example, you could go ahead and search for Lucid, click on the 3 dots, click View Detail, read more about it, and click Run. By doing that, you have now a library of icons to select from. In this example, you could select for chevron, and as you can see, it gives you a variety of options to choose from. So I'm going to close this, and I've already selected my icons. All I have to do is to create multiple components out of my icons. As you can see, once I select multiple frames, I don't have the ability to create a component. I need to go again on the More Action, which is the 3 dots, click on it. Instead of creating a component, I now have to create multiple components. Again, this is the difference between creating a component, which groups everything, or creating individual components. The reason we are creating individual components because we want to explore instance swap property. So let's just go ahead, create multiple components. We don't want to combine them as variants. We click outside. Now, as you can see on the left hand side, we have 4 components added, which is master component icon. Also, what I can do is add a frame around all the master components and then just rename this to icons. This way my icons are grouped and I have the ability to use instance swap. Also, once you add a frame, you can again use this tiny icon, which is resize to fit. As soon as you do that, it would resize the frame around your components. Also, I can click on my button, scroll down, and click on the plus to add a white background color to my component variant. Since I created my card, all I need to do is to add the plus icon at the right side. So let's just go ahead, click on the plus icon, hold Option to drag it out. It is rendered as an instance. So all I need to do is click and drag it inside. Also, if you take a look at the left hand side, we have icons, card, buttons, and instances. If your layer panel is messy, you can always collapse everything by holding Option and L. By doing that, everything is collapsed and you're only focused on the one layer that you selected. And again, the shortcut is Command/, search for collapse. And again, the collapse layers is Option and L. This way I have an easier layer panel to work with. In this card example, we do want to have the plus icon all the way pushed to the right side, as well as the ability for us to switch between different icons. So what I can do is select the header and the paragraph by holding Command. As soon as you select two layers, even Figma on the top right side tells you that you have two layers selected. Now I can hold Shift and A to create another auto layout. I would double click, rename this to content, and I would reduce the spacing again to 8 pixels. Use my arrow keyboard to push it to the top. If we take a look at the left hand side, we have the master card, which is an auto layout. We have our content, which is another auto layout. Now we need to wrap the content and the plus in another auto layout as well. So we're nesting 3 auto layouts because we do want to push this to the right and have the card being wrapped from top to bottom. So let's just go ahead and wrap content and plus in another auto layout by holding Shift and A. Now we can double click and rename this to row. And now we need to switch the direction from vertical to horizontal. Also, I need to click outside, scroll up, bring the sign up, click and drag this. Also bring the login, click and drag this as well. Also zoom in right now. We're almost creating our card. We can click on it, Option and L to collapse everything. Now let's explore the structure of our card. So if I click on my card and expand this, we have the top row. If I also open the top row, we have content and a plus. We also have 2 buttons. So what we need to do is collapse the row, select the 2 buttons, Shift and A to create another auto layout, double click, rename this to row, change the direction from vertical to horizontal, and now double clicking on the sign up, use the arrow to move it to the left. Now we are in a good shape. Let's just go ahead and test this card. If I click on my card, try to expand this, it is working as expected. If your plus icon is not pushed all the way to the right side, you have to make sure you select the row and select the content, which is the paragraph and the header. Instead of having it being fixed, you can click on the drop down, select fill, and that would push the icon all the way to the right side. So I'm going to click outside and now click on this master card and create a component out of this. So I would navigate to the component, create a component. Now if I go ahead and hold Option and drag this out, you can see that as soon as I click on the instance, I don't have any ability to switch the icon. So now we can use another component property, which is called instance swap. So if I go ahead and click on my card, as you can see, this is the master component. So now I have the ability to add a property. So I go ahead and click on the plus. We explored variants in text. Now we are going to select instance swap. Let's just call this icons. And now for our default value, we would select that. And as you can see, we have a folder called icons. The reason that this is a folder is because we have our icons all wrapped in a frame. If we didn't have all of our icons wrapped in a frame as a group, it wouldn't appear as a group in the instance swap. So if I go ahead, click on the card, click on the plus, click on the instance swap, renaming this to icon, selecting the value, you see now I have the ability to select the icons frame. So if I go ahead and select that, it tells me to select one of the values as a default. So in this example, I would go with plus as my default value. Also, I have the ability to select preferred values, which means that I don't want this to be swapped with buttons. I only want this to be swapped with icons. So for my preferred values, I would click plus, and since I have everything grouped as a frame, I can simply go to my icons, select that, and you see now my nested instances are all being selected. Once I'm happy, I would just click create property. Now you can see that I managed to create my instance swap property. We get an error icon here, the same way that we got an error icon when we created our text property. So all we need to do is to link this to the plus icon. So let's just go ahead, double click on the plus icon, and we have to make sure that this is an instance that we selected from the icons frame. And as soon as we select that instance, we can now navigate to the 3 dots and select apply instance swap property. If I go ahead and do that, Figma gives me a pop-up. Now I have the ability to select the instance swap property. By doing that, now you see that the icons is now highlighted for me, which means that this icon is linked to all the icons that I have under the icon frame. Since I created my instance swap property, I can now click on my header card. Now you see that my icons is appearing here, so I can click on the plus and I have the ability to switch between minus and chevron easily. The last component property is a Boolean, which means sometimes if you have a card, you might not always use buttons or paragraph, so you can hide and show them. For example, you want your users to click on the plus and then show the buttons and paragraph, and click on the minus to expand and collapse that. So we can use Boolean component property. So now we can click on the row, which is the buttons, Let's collapse everything holding Option and L. So we have, again, our row, which is under the component, which is an auto layout frame nested inside our master card component. By selecting the button row, we can go ahead under appearance and click on this tiny icon to create a Boolean property, or we can click on our card, hover over the properties and click plus and go ahead and select Boolean. And for the name, we would just write show buttons. By default, we have it as true, which means we do want this buttons to show. So we would create that property. And then as you can see, again, Figma gives us an error message that we haven't used that. So we need to now link our Boolean show buttons. So we go ahead and select that row, which is the button row. Go ahead under appearance, click on that tiny icon and link it to show buttons. So if I click on my master card, now I have an instance swap property. Also, I have a Boolean property, which means that if I click on my instance, now I have the ability not only switch between different icons, which is chevron, minus, or plus, I have the ability to show and hide my buttons. And as you can see, we are now creating an interaction to collapse and expand our card. Let's just go ahead and do that for the paragraph. So I would scroll up to the master component, select the paragraph, and this time instead of using the master component to create another Boolean property, we can navigate to appearance, click that tiny icon. We don't want to link it to the show buttons. We do want to create a brand new property. Click that and then rename this to show paragraph. And by default, we do want it to be visible. So we would create that. And now if you go ahead and click on this instance card, now we have three properties. We can hide our paragraph, we can hide our buttons, and now we have our expandable card created. Also, instead of minus, we can go ahead and click plus. That means if a user click on the plus icon, it would show the paragraph and the buttons. Not only that, if I click on this, again, I don't have the ability to update the header and the paragraph. So what I can do is select the header from the master component, go ahead to the typography section and click on that tiny icon to create a text property. Let's call this header and then create that property. Also select the paragraph, go to the typography section, create another text property. Instead of linking it to header, we would rename this to paragraph, create the second text property. Now if I go ahead and select my card instance, I have 5 different component properties. But what you notice is it only is showing 4 component property. The reason is we are hiding the paragraph, which means if I click and show the paragraph, I have the ability to conditionally edit the paragraph text. In this example, as soon as I click on show paragraph, you see the paragraph is showing. Now I have the ability to update the value. Let's just go ahead and hide that. Click outside, duplicate that using option, and let's create a collapsible card. So if user clicks on the plus, we want everything to show and we want the plus icon to change to minus. So we would click on the second card, switch the icon from plus to minus. Now we want to show the paragraph and show the buttons, and this is our collapsible card. On the plus, we do want to show everything and change this to minus. And when the user click on the minus, we do want to hide everything and only show the header and switch the icon to plus. Also, it would be nice if I can click on my card and dynamically change the text label of my gray button and my white button. We could do that using exposed nested instances. So if I go ahead and navigate to the cards, right now we have 5 component properties. All I need to do is hover over the properties, click the plus, and now we see another option being highlighted, which is exposed properties from nested instances. This option is only available to you because we are nesting another component inside this component. So if I go ahead and select nested instances, it tells me which of these 3 components you want to expose. As you can see, we have the plus instance and the first button and the second button. So we do want to have the first and second button selected. Now if we go ahead and close that and we navigate over to the card that is expanded, now we see that we have 9 component properties to work with. If I go ahead and select my collapsed header, we only have 4 components to work with. As soon as I enable the buttons, we have 4 additional components to work with. This is all conditional, which means as soon as we expand something and expose the nested instances, all we have to do is to update the values using the component properties. Let's just go ahead and replace these values with some text. Finally, we replace the value with some content. And as you can see, if we click on the right side, we see that our header, paragraph, and text properties are all filled. Our exposed nested instances from the button is also filled. So all we have to do is to link them and create a quick prototype. So what we have to do is highlight both of them, go ahead and click on the 3 dots, create multiple components, combine them as variants, rename the property to expand, giving the first one as false and giving the second one as true. By doing that, I can now simply click and drag this outside, and now we see that we have expanded and collapse. So we can simply toggle between different states. And as you can see here, we don't have the ability to see the other component properties. We already know that we can go to the master component, go on the properties, click plus, click nested instances and expose them. By doing that, once we expose the nested card, we can collapse this and go ahead and visit this one. Right now you see we have the ability to expand and collapse this. change the icon, update the text as we type, hide and show paragraphs and buttons, and we have ourselves a fully interactive component. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more design tips and tutorials, and let me know what you think in the comments down below.